All right, I think we are good to go. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. Hello, thanks for joining today to our latest live webinar where we'll be diving into the Microsoft integration with Micetro. Before we get started, I just have like 4 slides. I want to make sure we're all kind of on the same page on what Micetro is, especially if you're coming from a Microsoft shop where you're using kind of Microsoft DNS and DHCP services, even Microsoft IPAM, as some people call it, or what others might just call Excel. So, Excel, we kind of laugh about spreadsheet IPAM, but it's really not a horrible way to organize your data, right? But I really wouldn't qualify it as an IP address management solution, right? It's really more of a kind of a static information storage place or something more elegant than that, right? But it's only ever as good as your least detail-oriented person. And I say that being kind of not a very detail-oriented person myself. I remember being an engineer, and kind of the last thing was making sure the documentation was all correct. And I knew future me was going to regret it if it wasn't correct. But at the same time, we just get busy and things happen, right? We have the best of intentions, especially if you have multiple people kind of contributing to the spreadsheet, or maybe you have multiple spreadsheets that different teams are keeping. There's really not a single source of truth in that situation, right? And if there is, maybe not a source that you can trust. The other thing about spreadsheets is that you really aren't seeing any DNS or DHCP information unless you've kind of built that in already, right? And even if you did build in that DNS column, DHCP column, there's no guarantee that people are filling out those cells in your spreadsheet, right? You can't necessarily trust that information, even if it's filled in. Is it updated, right? All of that stuff that, again, we all have the best of intentions and we want to do what's right. But at the same time, sometimes we just can't get to it. We're always busy, right? And speaking of being busy, there's no real proactive alerting that comes with a spreadsheet IPAM, right? Nothing will keep you more busy than your CEO or your boss coming in and having an IP conflict with another device, right? And them not being able to get on the network. And it's not all about the alerting, going kind of beyond that now to our experience economy, what some people are calling, right? But providing your customers with the best experience possible sometimes means providing new services, new revenue streams. We think about retail, we think about people that are offering curbside pickup, or kind of offering location-based coupon delivery, right? Like just based on the aisle of the supermarket that you're standing in. We think about warehouses, right? And being able to find widgets, being able to find assets very quickly so that we can get it out the door, so that we can compete with others in our little industry areas, right? And how quickly are you able to bring these new services to the market? How quickly are you able to bring in new revenue streams, and how well are you giving the best experience to your customers if you can't really trust the information that you have in your spreadsheet, right? So that's kind of some of the things we'll be talking about. Of course, the other part of DDI, right? DNS and DHCP, we're kind of in a similar situation here. Now, don't get me wrong, right? Microsoft DNS and DHCP, it works, right? It just works. And that's lovely, right? It's kind of built in. But you're missing a lot of the capabilities that will help you simplify your operations. And I'm talking about, it doesn't have to be that you are some huge conglomerate. You could just be one site using only Microsoft, 100% Microsoft, maybe a little bit of an external DNS provider, right? Or it could be the case that you have multiple sites, multiple vendors, multi-cloud, right? All of the multis, all the multi-buzzwords, right? And that's very difficult to manage as well when you are only using native Microsoft services or native services in general, right? Route 53 through AWS, Azure, DNS, those kinds of things. Microsoft DNS and DHCP can also be difficult to troubleshoot, right? Especially given that zones or records or scopes, the event logs, all of that aren't necessarily centralized, right? We sometimes have to access several different servers and several different sites to get the information that we need, not always from a troubleshooting perspective, right? But to maybe return a DNS request or fulfill a ticket, those kinds of things. And again, there's no real proactive alerting here. We kind of have to go to the event viewer, see what's happening. Maybe you have some sort of alerting system set up, but it's not probably ideal. And then, in that case, we also maybe experience some alert fatigue because the alerting isn't set up, to understand how DNS and DHCP actually work, right? And then we're stuck using very manual processes when we're talking about bringing things to market, right? You could maybe do some PowerShell or some custom scripting, but as far as building in DNS and DHCP and even, IP addresses into your current workflows, if you're becoming more automated, if you're, leaning towards DevOps more, to really kind of build those things in, maybe using Ansible or Terraform or connecting to third-party solutions like ServiceNow or Splunk, all of that stuff can be a little bit more difficult when we're using Microsoft natively, right? I also want to talk a little bit about access management. I know a lot of folks put DNS and DHCP services right on their domain controllers in a Microsoft environment. And whether that's best practices or not, is kind of beside the point. It happens. And what that means is that you actually have to give access then to a domain controller, right? And maybe there's only one of you, right? And you're the super admin, so it doesn't matter. But even if there is only one of us, right, as we all learned at some point, the principle of least privileges says that, well, we shouldn't probably always be using our super admin account in case we do, some sort of human error or something, right? Or in case there's a malicious attack and someone's able to get our password. Kind of using those different, more granular ways of accessing things and not having to give access to the domain controller is going to be, a best security practice at the very least, right? So these are just kind of things that they keep in mind as we talk about what Micetro can do, talk about kind of enhancing these capabilities without having to totally rip and replace everything that you already have going, especially in your Microsoft environment, right? So we're not only going to talk about the enhancement to the technology itself, to your DNS and DHCP solutions, how you're tracking your IP information, right? But how you can actually kind of enhance your quality of life at work. I can't enhance your quality of life, anywhere else, but hopefully I can help you a little bit at work. So what we'll be demoing today, Micetro, is a non-authoritative, non-disruptive solution for your entire DDI environment. And when I say DDI, right, I mean DNS, DHCP, and IPAM, but really what we mean when we say DDI is this solution that offers a full picture and kind of that intermingling of the information from all of these different protocols, right? Contextualizing the information. And this is whether you're running workloads on premises or you're running them in the public cloud, wherever you're running workloads, Micetro will give you just a centralized UI or API if you're doing more automation so that you only have one place to go and maintain workflows, maintain processes. So, it just makes operations much simpler and gives you a more consistent network, right? And when we talk about consistency, when we talk about automation, when we talk about orchestration, we're not talking about time savings. I mean, time savings is great. We all appreciate that. What we're really talking about is better uptime, easier troubleshooting, and better performance, right? Again, going back to that experience economy, it's about your experience as, the people running IT, and then it's about your customers' experience as well, whether those customers are your coworkers or those customers are actual paying customers. I'm just going to talk about kind of, before I jump into the demo, get some things off the checklist to make sure that I mention them fully, and then I'll go ahead and demo them. So Micetro uses a pure role-based access control model, and this can be built from scratch, right? You can be Micetro users and groups, or of course we'll integrate with your Active Directory on premises or Azure AD if you're moving into kind of Azure AD. And we can do that then, unlike Microsoft natively, we can help you provide granular access down to the DHCP scope or to the DNS zone, sometimes more granularly, and I'll show you how that works too. from, logging, it's just way simpler. I'll just put it that way, right? You just find the DDI object you're looking for, whether that be a range or an IP address or a scope or a zone or a record, and right click it basically and say view history, and then who, what, where, when, right? Something happened. Also, what I love talking about, and we will definitely show this, is we can allow you to create custom properties like identification, right, in order to do some of this more asset tracking part of DDI. As we move into more complex network environments, knowing where things are located, knowing what they do, who owns them, any sort of identification information that you can think of, we can put that into Micetro so that you can easily search for it. You can easily, create a folder and only view those things, all sorts of ways to parse and organize this information so that you know what you're working with. Because from a security perspective, right, if you can't see something, you don't know how to secure it or whether to secure it, right? From an automation perspective, if we can't see something, we can't do anything with it. So really kind of this organization piece is paramount to simplifying operations in your environment. Okay, I promise the demo is next, but just to kind of drive home what we mean by overlay, I want to go through this. Let me find my little pointer here. Okay, so imagine you're the admin or engineer, probably not hard to imagine, and you get on your browser and you go to the web UI, right? You just type in whatever the FQDN of your Micetro Central server, and it takes you to the management. Micetro Central is just the brains of the operation. The web services in Central can live on the same server. They can be separate components, kind of up to you how you want to do that, but very easy to just put it all on one server, especially if you're doing like a free trial or something like that. Micetro Central, like I said, the brains of the operation, and then there is a backend database that stores all of your information. Now, again, if you're doing like the free trial or you have a really small shop or a small site that you're kind of maintaining, then you can just use the embedded PostgreSQL database. And again, that just comes with it, could all live on the same server if you wanted to. However, if you already have like a database farm and database admins and all of those folks may be running Microsoft SQL, right? We're talking about Microsoft integration, and they've got HA set up and all of that good stuff, then certainly we'll work with that too. We're very flexible with what you want to use in the back end that works best for you and your environment. So the overlay part, right? This is where Micetro Central connects to your DHCP service. So this is a Microsoft webinar. Let's talk about Microsoft. Micetro Central will connect to Microsoft DHCP or Azure, Azure DNS, right? Same with DNS. From an IPAM perspective, right, we'll import from CSV. You can add manually. You can find IP information through discovery, all sorts of ways to get that IP information into Micetro immediately. Now, the devices don't have to be changed. So my devices are still pointing to Microsoft, still pointing to my underlying DNS and DHCP services. And Micetro just connects to those services. So that's what I mean by non-disruptive. That's the power of the overlay, is that I can install the Micetro free trial in about 20 minutes, maybe, and get all of this information for my entire environment immediately without having to change all of those underlying devices, which we all know, yeah, maybe it's only a few hundred, maybe it's a few thousand, right? Okay, let's get to the demo finally. All right, so here I have browsed to my Micetro web UI. I've specified which server we're at and just put in my login information. What I do want to show is that you can log in with Azure AD if you like, with Okta 2, or with your on-premises Active Directory information. We'll provide multi-factor authentication as well if you prefer to use MFA, and then of course the single sign-on through these services as well. And I knew I fat fingered it. Let's see if I can get in. Okay, here we go. So here we just have, our Micetro welcome screen. If you want to find the documentation and all of that good stuff, all of our documentation is open, by the way. You can easily find it and read through it if you like. But let's stick with the access management topic for now. So like I said, Micetro uses an RBAC model, role-based access control, pure RBAC. You can see from the users here under access management, I have all kinds of users, you know, a Micetro user, AD, Azure AD, what have you, right? If I have public cloud, I can use some IAM services here. Groups, of course, again, we don't make you reinvent the wheel. If you have AD groups, then we'll use those AD groups. And then what I mean when I say pure RBAC, excuse me, I'm just getting over a cold, so I just have to cough real quick. Okay, sorry about that. So what I mean when I say pure RBAC is that allow, deny permissions are all assigned to the role itself. You can't directly assign that to a user or group. This just makes it a lot more tenable to manage from, you know, as you grow, you know, that you're not kind of dealing with granular permissions for each and every user. So we have built-in roles, and then you can create your own roles as well. We have general roles, which kind of apply to a system-wide, you know, all of your DNS, all of your DHCP or your entire DDI environment. And then we have more specific roles, which may apply to a specific DHCP scope or DNS zone. And again, you can create these on your own. These legacy ones down here, you can ignore. It's for people that were on prior versions. And so we just want to make sure all of their access permissions still worked. So we built that in. But the general and specific access is kind of what's important here. And then you can see I can get down to a read-only view of IPAM, right? I can get down to requesters, right? DNS requesters, we see that here. And I'll take you through what that means, being able to request a workflow, request a DNS record right here in Micetro in the GUI. And then there is an approver's role as well. So we can get even more granular than say the scope or zone down to a specific DNS record, right? Okay, any questions about access management and what we can do there? Again, I just want to kind of reiterate that you can't get that granular with Microsoft native services, right? This is an enhancement that we're giving. Okay, let's stick right here in the admin tab, and you can easily kind of parse through. You'll find over here on the left, we have built-in filters, right? What we think you're most often going to look for. We've put that right in here. Like no matter which tab you're on, the left-hand side will kind of allow you to easily filter things. And then, you know, we'll have a quick filter as well as like a search capability for the entirety of Micetro. So lots of different ways to find your information. But as you can see, I can click on Microsoft DNS, I can click on Microsoft DHCP and see immediately what is Microsoft in my environment. I can do things like, you know, edit the options, reconcile DHCP scopes. So I point that out because what we do as an overlay is kind of pull in the capabilities from the underlying service. So for Kia, for example, there's no need to reconcile DHCP scopes because it doesn't work the same way, right? In Microsoft, we have, if there's a mismatch in information between the registry and between the database, and we need a way to reconcile that. And so we pull that capability into Micetro so that you don't have to go to Microsoft in order to do those things. Okay, so then if I want to add a new server, I can do it there, but let's go back and do it right here. We'll add a DNS server, and I'm going to call it DC15. We'll call it that. We'll do the FQDN. We'll have an IP address. And then, of course, server type is Microsoft. And then you see this option to do agent free. And this is a Microsoft option, right? Because we work very closely with Microsoft. We are a selected Microsoft partner. And what this agent free option means is it's not exactly agent free, but it's as close as you can get, right? So what we do is we offer the ability to put one Microsoft agent, you know, the way that we communicate with these services. You can just put one agent on one Microsoft server in your domain. As long as your other Microsoft servers can communicate with that proxy server, then you don't have to install that agent anywhere else, right? So that means you only maintain and upkeep that one agent for your entire domain. And then you obviously you put in the proxy IP address of that server here if I'm adding, my second and third and fourth and so on servers. Now I already have quite a few Microsoft servers, so I don't really need to add a new one, but let's take a look at the IPAM tab and talk a little bit about IPAM and DHCP Microsoft integration. What I want to kind of go to next is continue on with this topic of custom properties, right? And this topic of asset management, because I think it's becoming more and more important, more so than people realize. And it's actually probably my favorite feature in Micetro. It's very simple, right? It's a very simple feature, but it can make your life much easier. And of course, this isn't a Microsoft only feature, but what it does is enhance your ability to track your Microsoft DDI objects, right? So you see these column headers at the top. These are all custom properties, or some of them are built in, right? I can get a view here. I can kind of rearrange them. They can be, a project, right? So I have migration here, and maybe has this been migrated, yes or no. I can get VLAN ID information. I can specify whether, the ticket number or the region, the data center, the slot within the rack, right? All sorts of things, all sorts of identity information that I can specify there. And then literally do quick filter searches on it, or even create folders, either static or dynamic folders, right? What I mean by dynamic is the ability to kind of pull in the information. Like right here, I have any/24 that's large, that has utilization over 50%, right? Maybe I just want to know that information. I can do really complicated regex expressions with this. And then when I click on that particular smart folder or dynamic folder, it just automatically pulls that information in. So you can imagine, what you can do with that information, right? You can imagine what you can do from the API with that information from an automation perspective, right? There's endless ways to do this, and also just talking to your compliance auditors and handing over reports and things like that, right? We just want to simplify operations for you all. I'll quickly show you kind of how you edit those things, which is right here again under the admin tab under custom properties. So pretty much everything, any object will have these custom properties, which you can create on your own, populate on your own, and then you can make them either required or optional, right? So going back to that documentation, hey, you actually have to fill this out if you want to create this new object. So yeah, exactly. That's what we want to get to is this very consistent documenting. And I see there's a question if this recording is going to be shared. Yes, it will be on demand. If not tomorrow, probably the next day. So you'll absolutely have it. Let's go back to IPAM. So under the IPAM tab is where our DHCP lives as well. So you can see all of your networks and you can see the different types, but then you can also just go down to DHCP scopes. Remember, on the left-hand side is where we filter everything, right? I already talked about the ability to reconcile scopes. You can see that we have DHCP v6 and DHCP v4 in the same place. We actually do some nice things with DHCP v6 here too. If I go to manage DHCP v6 exclusions, for example, you can see that I can specify this information by using percentages, right? That's just kind of a cool feature because it's really hard to remember IPv6 IP addresses, right? So being able to do things by percentages, if you want like a 20/80 split or however you were doing that in your environment, it's very easy to set up and then maintain consistency. And then I think that's all I wanted to show with DHCP. Oh, but I will show this too. We can also go by services here. So when I show DHCP servers, then I get a list of the services that I'm using. And of course, I know that the DNS DHCP 12 is a Microsoft server. And so I can see, what lives there. We also have 80 sites, right? Active Directory sites. So we'll work with your Active Directory going beyond users and groups to sites and subnets. So you can go ahead and add your forest So you can use the same global catalog server, the server that actually allows it to serve out information to third-party solutions like ours, right? Specify that information, specify your username and password, and then what I really like about this is the ability to make that read only then. I love this for mergers and acquisitions. If you are acquiring a company, you might not want to make changes, but you still want to see everything because your architects need to plan and you need to understand what the environment's going to look like. Excuse me again. Okay. And then of course I can go in, of course we have sites set up by geography. You can do all sorts of things like go visit. You get some information over here on the right. If you want a better view, you can click the meatball menu, see the view networks, and it automatically creates this quick filter for you using a regex expression. And now just something fun that I like to show, if I were to create a smart folder now, anything that's in this filter is going to automatically populate. And then I can save it with a descriptive name very easily. While we're here too, let's go ahead. Actually, let's jump to DNS and I'll show it because I think it'll be more interesting information. But you can do this anywhere with any object, right? But again, clicking on this meatball menu and then clicking on view history, I get information about that object, no matter where it lives. This zone may actually have multiple primary authoritative servers. There could be all sorts of things going on. I don't know where this zone lives. I don't know where the records live, but it doesn't matter because it's all right here in the centralized environment. And then I can just right click on it basically, or click on the meatball menu, go to view history, get the time, type, user description, and even a comment. And especially if you're using some sort of automation, right, you can build in this commenting so that you know what's going on and why something changed. Along those lines of troubleshooting, right, we know that, if anything goes wrong in your network, that probably something changed, right? That's why we're all very careful. We step away slowly when changes are made. We have windows and all of that. But I can go to recently created and recently modified to see the things that have just recently changed. And then of course, go to, view history immediately or get my access information immediately right there for that specific DDI object, in this case, the DNS zone. We have AD integrated zones as well, of course. We wouldn't want to leave DNS out. So all of these zones are Active Directory integrated. You can see that here under the authority. So they are on a Microsoft server, of course, and we get all of that good information. You can see if I were to create a new zone, I would give it a name and then select AD integration. And then I can share how that data is going to be replicated within my domain or forest. Okay, so that's kind of the bread and butter, right? The meat and potatoes, but let's talk a little bit more. I have a couple minutes, so I want to go through some other enhancements and features that you can use that really take things way beyond, what you can do with native services like Microsoft. And the first being XDNS. So XDNS is a unique feature, capability. It's better than a feature. It's a capability that allows you to build in multi-service DNS redundancy. So obviously DNS is redundant in and of itself, but what you're missing is the ability to put, make several different services primary for one zone. So maybe you have a really important zone that can't go down. Maybe it's an e-commerce site. Maybe you just don't want your website to go down because you don't want to lose trust with your prospects or customers. And the only way we can really do that is to say, hey, I want AWS Route 53, as well as this on-prem to provide DNS for this one zone, right? Or maybe it's a managed external DNS provider, whatever that is. The only way that you can say you're not going to go down is by taking kind of that control back, right? Because there's nothing you can do if your managed DNS service provider goes down, right? You have no control over that. All you can do is have a backup plan. And it's very easy to set up. So because Micetro doesn't require authority over it, we can kind of deal that authority out to 2 or more services. And you just set up a profile. And within that profile, you specify conflict strategies, either override or merge, and then you just add whatever services that you want to add, 2 or more services. And then these 2 or more services will become authoritative for that zone. Now you could do this manually, right? Like that's possible. But the problem is when you do things manually, you know, what happens when the service comes back up? Is everything replicated? Can you trust that it's going to work? So along those lines, we also do what we call kind of a pre-flight check. So literally, I just go to any zone, add to XDNS profile, and it'll perform this pre-flight check for me. And I can pick which profile I want to add it to, and you know, it'll tell me different errors or maybe no errors. If there are errors, then obviously I need to remediate that, and then I can go ahead and add this zone to my XDNS profile. And then I can see those zones very easily that have been added. And now, if one of these goes down, we can see over on the right-hand side, these green dots mean that both services are up. But even if AWS went down, my DC16 would be up, right? And vice versa. And we've seen this before, right? Facebook went down, Meta, I should say, went down, Facebook, Instagram, all the attached affiliated, you know, solutions, products went down. And it wasn't a DNS issue, it was a BGP routing issue, right? But the problem is DNS became inaccessible. And when you can't access DNS, it doesn't work. And then all your sites go down, right? You literally lose money. According to Gremlin, the top 3 e-commerce sites lose $3.5 million an hour for every hour that there's an outage, right? A website outage. And of course, DNS is a big part of that. DDoS attacks are on the rise. Human error occurs, like in the case of Facebook with the BGP routing protocol. So all sorts of reasons why XDNS is actually a very cool capability. The last thing I want to show, because I try not to go over a half hour and we're already a minute over, but I do want to show this really quick, is the ability to do this granular workflow, right? So in the case of a developer wanting to put out a new service, right? I talked about go to market, bringing new services to market. Part of the problem is, you know, siloed teams. Part of the problem is no single source of truth, no easy way to request IP addresses and fulfill those tickets. So what we've built right into the GUI, right? Also the API, if you want to use that, is the ability, actually, let me jump into one of these, the ability to create a new record. So you can give someone requester privileges like I showed earlier, right? And let's just call it blog, and we'll give it some quick information. So once I type in enough information, a couple octets here, could be IPv4, IPv6, it'll give me, you know, oh, these ranges match up with that. So then I pick a range, and it'll automatically pick the next free IP address for me, right? So it takes kind of that out of the developer's hands. They don't have to think about that. They don't know what's going on. Maybe it's a self-service portal situation, right? That hooks into this. That's, you know, probably a good use case. If they try to force a different one, let's see if 2 is taken, it'll tell them that it's assigned and they can't have that one, right? It can be held as well. So once we request it, this IP address is going to be held for a few minutes, or however long you specify it is changeable or customizable. And so now, you know, who's the owner? And now I have the option to add a request. Now, because I'm an admin, I also have the option to create now. But let's say I don't have that option and I add to request. Now, keep in mind, as a developer, I'm probably making a 3 to 6 tiered application. So I have several IP addresses, several DNS requests that I'm asking for. And this is just for my test environment or my dev environment, right? And then I'll move it to the test environment and then to production. So right there, you know, 6 times 3, we have 18 different requests. And so we can do all of those at once, or, you know, in tiers, however we want to do it in bulk, right? So I could have multiple requests in here. This is my little shopping cart where all my requests are. I click next. You can schedule the request for a maintenance window possibly, or, you know, when do I need it by? Put in a comment if you like. I love this ability to comment all the way through so that people know what you're talking about. It just kind of reduces the communication issues that can exist between teams, right? And then we click submit. Okay, and again, because I'm an admin, it's asking me, do I want to just go ahead and approve? For the sake of the demo, I'll jump into workflow here, and that's the capability we're showing, right? You see that I have a pending request. Now I come in as an approver, right? I'm a different person. I've come in as my super admin, my approver, and I can go ahead and double click on that and see what's been requested. And then I can either reject or approve. I'm going to reject, you know, I'm going to say not applicable because I can in this situation. Hopefully, usually I would provide a little bit more information, but it's as easy as all of that, right? And again, looking at this from like a self-service, from a ticketing system integration perspective, this just makes, lives much easier, much simpler, and it creates a very consistent environment for your entire DDI environment. Again, whether you're using only Microsoft or whether you're using multiple services, right? It's all the same from Maestro's perspective. And you get the same UI and you get the same API. So that learning curve is really reduced as well. If you're bringing new admins in, if you're trying to bring in new services, if you're just migrating to public cloud now, right, you can kind of do all of this in the same way that you've always known, or teach your help desk to do things in the same way they know how to do it, right? So it's really a much more sustainable way to do things in this overlay architecture, right, which is pretty unique to the DDI environment. We see it in other places in networking now, right? When we talk about SDN, SD-WAN, even like VMware vSphere to a degree, right? But this is pretty unique to the DDI world, and we are so happy to be bringing that to everyone. So with that, I'm a little bit over my time, but I appreciate you all joining. I see someone has a question. Let me allow everyone to talk that joined a little later. Any questions? I see a hand, but maybe you prefer to type. Casey, great question. So I won't be able to show in this demo as we only have a couple minutes left, but we can definitely hook you up with a demo showing how we connect with Cisco devices. Right now, it is only like the traditional switches that we connect with. So we're working on more integration there. But essentially, it all is done through add DNS or DHCP server, right? Add Cisco. All right, everyone. Well, please feel free to reach out anytime. And I'm Lauren at menandmice.com. If you would like to try our free trial, go ahead and download it. It's right there on the website, menandmice.com. We do have a playlist, Micetro deployment tutorials, which should get you up and running in, like I said, less than a half hour. And then there's a Microsoft integration playlist as well. And then on our Microsoft page on the website, we have a Microsoft solution brief, which is pretty technical. It'll walk you through how you actually do some of this stuff that I showed and go even more in depth. And you don't even have to fill out a form and give us all of your information. So feel free to check that out. Thanks everyone for joining, and we will see you in a couple weeks at the next webinar.